The mandap glimmered under strings of marigolds and fairy lights, their golden glow reflecting off the polished marble floor. A soft breeze carried the scent of jasmine and sandalwood, mingling with the faint smoke rising from the ceremonial fire at the center. Guests murmured in hushed excitement, cameras flashing, as the sound of the shehnai wove a delicate celebratory rhythm through the hall. Every detail spoke of tradition, of family honor, of a day meant to mark a beginning. But beneath it all, a storm waited, unseen. Anaya, the bride, sat with the grace of a goddess, her red silk sari embroidered with gold thread that caught the light with each subtle movement. Her hands rested lightly on her knees, adorned with henna patterns that twisted into delicate vines, flowers, and hidden symbols. She smiled politely at relatives and distant cousins, though a faint tremor ran through her fingers. Beneath the outward composure was a reservoir of tension, the fear of discovery, the weight of expectation, the quiet hope that love alone could protect her from judgment. Raghav, the groom, sat opposite her, the weight of his golden shawani pressing more heavily on him than the fabric should have. His eyes flickered over her face, memorizing every detail as though the image alone could confirm his happiness. And yet, a cold unease gnawed at the edges of his mind. The fire before them, sacred and unyielding, reflected in his pupils like molten suspicion. He smiled for the cameras, nodded for the priests, and recited mantras, but every syllable felt strained, as though it carried more tension than devotion. Around them, the wedding rituals unfolded with meticulous precision. The priests chanted invocations, offering prayers to deities for a lifetime of harmony and prosperity. A small brass bell rang with each sacred step. Guests clapped in rhythm, unaware of the undercurrents weaving through the ceremonial joy. Anaya's mother, seated beside her, whispered reassurances, pressing a cool hand to her daughter's back. Yet even these gestures could not reach the invisible chasm growing between bride and groom, an unspoken tension neither dared name aloud. As the ritual of the 7 vows began, Anaya's heart raced. She followed the priest's instructions with care, her voice trembling ever so slightly as she repeated the sacred promises. Raghav mirrored her motions, but his thoughts spiraled elsewhere, flickering through fragments of unease that refused to settle. He noticed a slight quiver in her smile, a hesitation in her gaze, and though he dismissed it with a forced breath, the seed of doubt took root. The fire crackled, sending sparks upward like fleeting thoughts of the unknown. The guests cheered as the couple circled it, their hands linked, yet the air around Raghav seemed taut, charged with a tension that no celebration could dissolve. In the soft golden light, 2 hearts beat together, yet apart, one anchored in trust, the other teetering on suspicion. As the final mantra echoed and the circle completed, Anaya's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, almost imperceptible, but enough to catch Raghav's attention. A shadow of doubt crossed his eyes, lingering like smoke above the flames. Neither spoke, but the silence was heavy, an invisible promise that the next days would reveal truths no one yet dared name. And so, as the guests clapped and photographs captured the surface joy, the seeds of tension had been quietly sown, a fragile, combustible beginning that would soon ignite, changing everything they thought they knew about love, trust, and marriage. The morning light filtered through the delicate silk curtains of Anaya's room, casting a golden glow on the scattered bangles and intricately embroidered fabrics that filled the space. She sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully folding her red bridal sari, her mind a whirl of anticipation and unease. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of a distant fan and the occasional clatter of servants preparing the final touches for the wedding. Outside, the city moved as usual, oblivious to the storm brewing in the small decorated hall where her life would change forever. Anaya traced the patterns of her henna with a fingertip, almost as if touching each swirl could steady the trembling inside her. The smile she had perfected for the family, for the cameras, was a fragile mask. Beneath it lay years of carefully hidden truths, moments of fear, and dreams that she had long learned to protect. She remembered the day she decided to embrace her true self, to live authentically despite the risk of judgment. It had been liberating, yet terrifying. Now, as she prepared to walk into a life that promised love but demanded concealment, that fear returned in sharper relief. She recalled the first time she met Raghav. It was at a mutual friend's engagement party, a gathering brimming with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. He had been polite, charming in a quiet way, and strangely attentive, noticing details others overlooked. They had spoken for hours, laughing at shared stories, discovering common dreams, and feeling a rare, effortless connection. She had thought, for the first time, that perhaps someone could love her for all that she was, not just for the polished image she projected to the world. But even then, a small voice whispered caution. Some truths were heavier than affection could carry. Her memories were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. It was her mother, her eyes gentle yet lined with worry. "Beta, are you ready?" she asked, her voice a mixture of pride and apprehension. Anaya nodded, forcing her trembling hands to smooth the folds of her sari. Her mother lingered for a moment, placing a reassuring hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Remember, love is patience, and today, you must be brave," she murmured. Anaya smiled faintly, but her chest tightened. Bravery had always been a necessity, not a choice. In a quiet corner of the room, Anaya's phone buzzed. A message from an old friend made her pause. "Are you sure he knows everything? Please be careful." She swallowed hard, her heart skipping. She had long avoided confrontation, preferring secrecy to conflict. Yet the thought of Raghav discovering her truth, or worse, judging her for it, pressed down like a heavy weight on her chest. Could love survive this revelation, or would it become a weapon of humiliation, cutting through the fragile trust she had begun to build? She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the calm seep in, recalling her private sanctuary. In the rooftop garden of her childhood home, there she had learned to breathe through panic, to feel safe in her own skin, and to understand that the world's expectations could not dictate her worth. The garden was empty now, a memory preserved in silence, but its lessons remained. Authenticity came at a price, but hiding could cost even more. The servants entered, adjusting her jewelry and applying the final touches of makeup. She watched herself in the mirror, seeing a reflection both familiar and foreign. The bride everyone expected her to be, radiant and composed. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet storm of emotions threatened to spill. She thought of Raghav, of the moments they had shared, of the laughter and connection, and wondered if he could ever see her as she truly was. A deep exhale escaped her lips as she rose to stand, taking one last look at the room that had sheltered her fears and hopes alike. The veil over her head shimmered in the morning light, delicate as the line between concealment and revelation. She stepped toward the door, knowing that the world outside, the family, the rituals, the prying eyes, awaited her. And somewhere, beyond, the secrets she carried would either bind her to love or ignite the tensions lurking silently between them. As she walked into the corridor, the first sounds of drums and bells drifted closer. The day was beginning, and with it, the delicate, invisible threads of trust and doubt began to weave a story that would test the limits of marriage, courage, and the truths hidden behind the veil. Raghav sat in the quiet of his room, the heavy curtains drawn to block the noon sun. Golden threads of his shawani gleamed faintly in the dim light, but the garment felt suffocating, a weight heavier than any ritual could explain. Around him, the walls were adorned with family portraits, ancestors staring down, with eyes that seemed to demand honor, obedience, perfection. He traced a finger over a photograph of his parents on their wedding day, smiling under similar layers of gold and expectation, and felt the invisible chains tighten around his chest. It had been a week since he first sensed something was amiss. At dinner parties and gatherings, Whispers had danced at the edges of his awareness, glimpses of the bride's past, fleeting conversations that didn't add up, and a subtle undercurrent of judgment in the way relatives watched her. He told himself it was paranoia, that it was impossible for someone so beautiful, so refined, to conceal a secret that could unravel everything. Yet, as the wedding drew closer, the doubt had grown like a shadow creeping across a wall. He picked up his phone and scrolled through old messages, trying to find clarity, but found only fragments that fed his obsession. A friend's comment here, a social media post there. Each piece a puzzle that refused to fit. Raghav's pulse quickened as he replayed every interaction with Anaya in his mind. Her laughter, the tilt of her head when she listened, the warmth in her voice. All seemed genuine, yet, beneath that perfection, he imagined hidden truths, whispers of betrayal threatening to surface at the most inopportune moment. Raghav, his mother's voice broke through the silence, soft yet insistent. She stood in the doorway, her sari draped flawlessly, her eyes sharp beneath the fringe of gold bangles. "Are you ready? The rituals won't wait." He nodded, though he felt no readiness. "Yes, Ma." His voice was measured, calm, but inside, a storm churned. She had always been a force of guidance and pressure in equal measure, shaping him into the man he was expected to be, responsible, honorable, unyielding. Yet her expectations, though unspoken, pressed on him now like an unseen hand. She entered fully, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder. "Remember, today is sacred. Whatever happens, you must stand firm." Her gaze lingered on him, searching for signs of doubt. He forced a smile, trying to reassure her, trying to reassure himself. Firmness, strength, honor. These were the words that had defined his life, but now they felt brittle, fragile in the face of uncertainty. Alone again, he let his mind wander. He recalled the first time he truly saw Anaya at that engagement, party months ago. There had been a pull, subtle but undeniable, a magnetic draw that left him thinking of her long after the music ended. They had spoken about simple things, favorite films, childhood memories, shared dreams. For a moment, he had believed in the possibility of love, untarnished by the world's scrutiny. Yet now, that belief was under siege. He remembered the conversations with his friends, late-night talks where doubt was sown like seeds. "Are you sure she's completely honest with you?" one had asked, a casual question that lodged itself in Raghav's mind. Another had joked, "Family honor isn't something you gamble with." The words replayed relentlessly, morphing into warnings that he could not ignore. Raghav's reflection in the mirror caught his attention. He studied his own face, the tension etched around his eyes, the tight line of his jaw. He wanted to believe that love could overcome suspicion, that truth would not always hurt, but a deeper, darker voice whispered otherwise. He felt the weight of tradition, the expectations of a lifetime, pressing down with every heartbeat. The sound of distant drums reached him, the first rhythms of the wedding processions. The world outside his room was alive, vibrant, and waiting. Yet inside, Raghav felt trapped between desire and fear, love and doubt, honor and obsession. He took a deep breath, smoothing the folds of his shawani, and stepped toward the door, his mind a labyrinth of unspoken questions and hidden suspicions. As he emerged into the hall, golden light spilling over his shoulders, he saw Anaya waiting by the ceremonial fire. The image of her, poised and radiant, stirred conflicting emotions: admiration, longing, and the creeping, insidious tendrils of doubt. In that instant, the tension of the past week crystallized. The sacred promises they were about to make would be more than rituals. They would be tests of trust, of perception, of the fragile boundaries between love and fear. And as the guests cheered and the fire crackled, no one yet realized how swiftly the shadows of suspicion could engulf the day, or how the unseen fractures in a marriage could ignite a storm that neither tradition nor devotion could contain. The wedding hall was quiet for a moment, a deceptive lull between the chimes of bells and the hum of distant conversations. Raghav's mind, however, was far from calm. As he straightened his sherwani and adjusted his stole, a single thought replayed relentlessly. Did I truly know her? The seed of doubt planted in the previous days had grown into a thorny vine, twisting and pressing at the edges of his consciousness. Earlier that morning, a phone call had shaken the fragile equilibrium of the day. It came from an unknown number, the voice on the other end careful, almost conspiratorial. "Raghav, you should know. She isn't who you think she is," the caller whispered before hanging up abruptly. The words had been brief, almost dismissible, yet they planted a new, gnawing suspicion he could not shake. He replayed every interaction with Anaya, searching for lies that might confirm the fear growing in him. He tried to push the thought away during the early rituals. The priests chanted prayers, and Anaya's voice followed the instructions with the measured grace that had become her armor. She seemed serene, radiant, untouched by any of the whispers threatening to fracture the day. Yet every gesture, every smile she offered, now appeared to him as a potential mask. The sacred fire before them glimmered, each spark a mirror of the doubts igniting inside his mind. Later, during a private dinner in a secluded corner of the wedding venue, Raghav attempted a subtle confrontation. The guests were momentarily distracted, music playing softly, glasses clinking. "Anaya, you've always been honest with me, haven't you?" he asked, voice low but firm, searching her expression for hesitation. She looked up from her plate, calm but cautious. "I've told you everything that matters," she replied, her voice steady. Yet the pause before she spoke had been enough to feed Raghav's unease. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her dupatta, a subtle gesture that he misread as guilt rather than nerves. The conversation ended without resolution, leaving a residue of tension that clung to him like smoke. He excused himself, wandering toward the balcony where the afternoon sun cast long, warm shadows. From there, he could see the guests preparing for the evening rituals, unaware of the storm brewing inside him. He gripped the railing, the polished wood pressing into his palms, grounding him even as his thoughts spiraled. In that quiet moment, memories of whispered warnings from friends and relatives mingled with fragments of Anaya's past he had glimpsed. A comment on a social media post, a photograph that seemed oddly staged, a rumor overheard in passing. The human mind, he realized, could connect dots that were never meant to align. And now, in the isolation of the balcony, he felt the pull of those threads, the subtle insinuation of betrayal threading through his veins. Anaya's figure appeared at the balcony doorway, her silhouette framed by the golden light of the late afternoon. She leaned lightly against the frame, eyes soft but searching. "Raghav, what troubles you?" she asked. There was no accusation in her tone, only concern, yet it carried a weight he could not interpret. He shook his head, trying to suppress the storm of suspicion. "Nothing," he muttered, though his eyes remained fixed on the ground between them. She studied him, her lips pressed in a thin line, sensing the tension she could not fully name. For a moment, the space between them was charged, silent but electric, every heartbeat amplifying the unspoken questions. The call from the mysterious stranger lingered in his mind, a shadow that refused to leave. Raghav understood that the day, perfect and sacred as it appeared, held beneath its surface truths that could shatter everything. And as he glanced back toward the mandap, the flickering fire, and the assembly of family and friends, he knew that the next step, whether a confrontation or revelation, could not be postponed. Beneath the music and ritual, beneath the smiles and ceremonial garlands, a hidden truth waited to surface. It was delicate, dangerous, and potentially devastating. And Raghav, standing between love and suspicion, would soon face the decision that could define the rest of their lives. A choice that would transform joy into terror, in ways no tradition could foresee. The evening descended slowly over the wedding venue, casting long, restless shadows across the ornate walls. Guests had retreated to their rooms or whispered in hushed clusters, unaware of the silent storm brewing between the bride and groom. Inside his suite, Raghav paced, the polished marble echoing each step like a drumbeat of anxiety. The mysterious phone call from earlier had lodged in his mind, a seed that had now grown into a gnawing obsession. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the same pressure that had haunted him for weeks, reminding him that nothing, not even love, could be trusted completely. He retrieved his phone, scrolling through every message, every picture, every post that could give him clarity. Patterns began to emerge, or perhaps he willed them into being. A smile here, a word there. Suddenly, everything seemed a clue, a subtle betrayal hidden in plain sight. The line between paranoia and reality blurred, and in its shadow, his thoughts turned sharp, insistent. She is hiding something. I must know the truth. When Anaya entered the room quietly, carrying her clutch and carefully adjusted sari, he barely looked up. Raghav, she began, voice tentative. The evening rituals will start soon. Are you ready? He turned to her slowly, the faintest edge of accusation threading his tone. I am ready, but I need honesty. If there's anything you're not telling me, now is the time. The words hung in the air like smoke, curling and suffocating. She blinked, caught off guard, the warmth of the day's earlier smiles faltering. I've told you everything that matters, she said, her voice measured, though there was a quiver in her hands as she smoothed the folds of her sari. Why would you doubt me now? Raghav stepped closer, his face a mask of calm, but the fire in his chest flared. Because sometimes honesty is hidden, in small gestures, in half-truths. I see it in your hesitation, Anaya. I notice it in the way you avoid certain topics. He reached for her hand, but she pulled back subtly, sensing the shift in tone. The tension was cinematic, the soft flicker of lamps casting long shadows on the walls, the quiet hum of distant music underscoring the unspoken accusation. She looked into his eyes, trying to find the man she had laughed with, the one who had drawn her toward love. Instead, she saw suspicion, a relentless, invisible weight pressing against her chest. I don't know what you mean, she whispered, voice low. But every word she spoke seemed to confirm his doubts, at least in his mind. He tilted his head, studying her like a detective searching for hidden motives. You are scared to tell me something. I can see it, he said, voice soft, almost gentle, a dangerous comfort designed to manipulate. If you loved me, you would be honest. Her stomach churned as a wave of panic rose. She had anticipated challenges, prejudices, judgment from outsiders, but this was different. The one she had trusted implicitly was now questioning the foundation of their bond. And yet, she did not panic outwardly. She learned early how to navigate suspicion without revealing the storm within. Raghav's inner spiral deepened. He replayed conversations, gestures, fleeting moments, framing them as proof of deception. His own reflection in the mirror loomed. Behind her, the double image of doubt and desire coexisting in a warped reality. He could not stop. The urge to expose the truth consumed him, compelling questions, insinuations, small traps designed to make her falter, confess, or reveal more than she intended. Hours passed like tension-filled centuries. He led her through small interrogations disguised as concern. Are you sure you're not hiding anything? Do you think I wouldn't understand? Each question, carefully phrased, subtly chipped away at her composure, a psychological erosion that left her doubting whether she could maintain her calm. The corridors of the suite seemed narrower now, suffused with a sense of claustrophobic tension. The sacred rituals of the day, the joyous anticipation, the family celebrations, outside, all were muted beneath the pulse of suspicion, manipulation, and fear. Anaya felt the weight of Raghav's gaze, the unspoken demand for absolute honesty, as if love itself depended on confession. By nightfall, the hall outside was illuminated with lanterns, the air fragrant with incense. Inside, however, two people remained suspended in a psychological standoff, one seeking control, the other navigating truth and survival. And in the quiet, relentless shadows, Raghav's doubts festered, building toward a confrontation that neither tradition nor love could easily temper. The fragile veil of trust had begun to tear, and in the silence that followed, the promise of revelation and disaster hung heavier than the golden silk of their ceremonial attire. The old Haveli's corridors stretched endlessly before Arjun, shadows clinging to the cracked walls like secrets that refused to be spoken. The building, once a symbol of his family's wealth and pride, now felt like a mausoleum of forgotten grandeur. He wandered its hallways at night, sleepless, his footsteps echoing in the silence as though the Haveli itself was whispering back to him. Dia had noticed his restlessness. She asked no questions at first, perhaps respecting the weight that pressed on his chest. Yet her silence grew heavier than words. One evening, as he stood at the balcony staring into the courtyard, she joined him. The flickering lantern below cast her face in a soft glow, but her eyes carried a question too sharp to ignore. "You're not here with me, Arjun," she said gently. "You're somewhere else. Where is it?" He wanted to answer, but the truth tangled in his throat. He feared that speaking his doubts aloud would shatter what little foundation their fragile bond had found. "I'm here," he replied instead, a practiced lie that even he couldn't believe. Her gaze lingered on him, searching, but she turned away without another word. The silence that followed was colder than the wind that swept across the Haveli. Days turned into weeks, yet the unease between them deepened. The rituals of marriage continued, family dinners, temple visits, polite appearances. But beneath it all, their conversations remained half-finished, their gestures half-hearted. Arjun played the role of the dutiful husband, but at night he found himself haunted by the sacred fire, its flames replaying in his mind as though demanding an answer he was too afraid to give. Sometimes he wondered if the fire had consumed more than ghee and grains that day. Perhaps it had burned away his certainty, leaving him with only ash and questions. One night, he woke to the sound of anklets in the corridor. At first he thought it was Dia, but when he turned, she lay beside him fast asleep. The sound grew louder, unmistakable, the rhythmic chime of gungrus, steady and deliberate. His heart raced. The Haveli was old, yes, but not alive. And yet, as he stepped outside their room, he saw a faint glow at the end of the corridor, like a lamp swaying in unseen hands. He followed it. The glow led him to an abandoned wing of the Haveli, one that his grandmother had once declared cursed. Dust coated the floor, and the air smelled of damp stone. Yet, in the center of the hall, stood a mirror taller than him, framed in tarnished gold. The glow emanated from it, not reflected, but born from within. As Arjun approached, his breath caught. The mirror did not show him alone. Behind his reflection stood a figure draped in red, her face veiled, her hand resting on his shoulder. His blood ran cold. "Arjun." The voice was soft, almost mournful, and yet it pierced through him with terrifying clarity. He stumbled back, but the mirror's surface rippled as though water had been disturbed. The veiled figure leaned closer until her face almost broke through the glass. "You cannot hide from truth." The words struck like thunder. Arjun staggered out of the hall, his chest pounding, his body trembling as though the Haveli itself had pushed him away. He returned to the room, his skin clammy, his mind spiraling. Dia stirred in her sleep, murmuring his name, but he couldn't bring himself to wake her. How could he explain something he didn't understand himself? Morning brought no relief. The sunlight that streamed into the Haveli seemed too sharp, too revealing. Dia watched him at breakfast, her patience wearing thin. Whatever it is, Arjun, you need to tell me, she said firmly. Her voice no longer carried softness. It carried demand. He looked at her then, her hands steady on the table, her eyes unflinching. She deserved the truth, but he feared the cost of giving it. Soon, he said at last, his voice quiet, almost a whisper, but Dia shook her head. Not soon, Arjun. Now. Before he could reply, the sound of anklets echoed again, faint but unmistakable, drifting in from the abandoned wing. Both of them froze. Dia's eyes widened, her face paling. You hear it too? Arjun asked, his voice trembling. She nodded slowly. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, Arjun realized the echoes of doubt were no longer his alone. They had reached Dia too. The monsoon arrived with a fury, as if the sky itself had chosen to weep for Meera. For weeks after their return from Mumbai, the house carried a suffocating weight. The walls, once alive with laughter and footsteps, seemed to draw closer every day, pressing into Meera's chest until she struggled to breathe. She moved quietly through the halls, avoiding Aaron's eyes, avoiding the questioning looks of her mother-in-law. The rhythm of her daily chores became mechanical, boiling milk, grinding spices, folding saris, but her mind never settled. At night, she lay awake listening to the rain against the tiled roof, wondering if it was only a matter of time before the fragile fabric of her marriage unraveled completely. Aaron noticed her silence, but did little to break it. His guilt weighed on him, though he would never admit it aloud. He buried himself in work, returning late, the smell of the city clinging to him like an accusation. Each time he entered their room, Meera felt her body stiffen. She wished to ask him about the truth, about Asha, about the distance growing between them, but the words caught in her throat. One evening, as lightning cracked across the sky, a sudden power cut plunged the house into darkness. Meera lit a small brass lamp, its flame flickering against the wet glass windows. She was arranging the books on the table when a slip of paper fell from Arun's bag. Instinct guided her hand before reason could stop her. She opened it. It was a receipt from the same hotel in Mumbai where Arun had stayed during their trip. But the date was not from their visit. It was from the previous month, and the room number matched the one she remembered too well. The flame trembled in her hand. Her knees nearly buckled, but she forced herself still. A storm roared outside, and another began within her chest. She pressed the paper to her palm so tightly that her skin burned. When Arun entered moments later, shaking the water from his umbrella, he noticed her rigid stance immediately. Meera, what's wrong? Her voice came low, quiet, but trembling, with restrained fire. Tell me, Aaron, how many lies does one marriage hold? The words struck him harder than the storm outside. His face went pale, his lips parting as though to explain, but nothing came. The silence between them thickened, louder than thunder. Meera placed the paper on the table between them, her hands steady now, her heart not. Aaron's eyes fell on it, and for the first time, he had no mask, no practiced defense. It's not what you think, he managed at last, though even to his own ears, it sounded hollow. Then tell me what it is, she demanded, her voice breaking. Because all I see is a husband who swore by the sacred fire and a stranger who hides in shadows. Her words echoed in the small room, bouncing off the walls until they fractured into unbearable silence. Aaron lowered himself into a chair, pressing his face into his palms. For the first time since their wedding, he looked not like the confident son of the family, nor the dutiful groom, but a man cornered by his own choices. The lamp's flame sputtered and nearly died, but steadied again, weak yet persistent. Meera's eyes lingered on it, searching for meaning. Perhaps it was a sign of fragility, of endurance, or of both. Finally, Aaron lifted his head. His eyes, rimmed with exhaustion, met hers. I will tell you everything, he whispered, but you may not forgive me. The storm outside reached its peak, rattling the shutters, pouring rivers through the gutters. Mira's heart raced. She had braced for lies, excuses, evasions. But the tremor in Aaron's voice hinted at a truth more dangerous than she imagined. Her fingers curled tightly around the edge of the table. "Then speak," she said. "Let the storm outside bear witness to what you have kept hidden." And in that charged silence, Aaron drew a sharp breath, as if gathering courage to unveil the secret that had already begun to tear their world apart. The night was restless for both Arav and Mira. The echo of their argument reverberated in every silence, clinging to the corners of the room like a ghost that refused to leave. Neither spoke much after the confrontation. Arav had retreated to the balcony, his phone in hand, scrolling aimlessly but truly lost in thought. Mira sat by the window, her reflection staring back at her, a reminder of the woman she had become, strong, questioning, unwilling to be silenced. The city outside was alive with distant honks and faint laughter, but their apartment was a fortress of unease. Sleep evaded them, each hour dragging, each thought heavier than the last. By morning, the tension had not broken. It had only grown sharper. Mira decided to leave early for work, barely touching the breakfast Arav half-heartedly. "Prepared. I'll be late," she said, her tone clipped, avoiding his eyes. Arav nodded, guilt gnawing at him, yet unable to summon the right words to bridge the widening gap. At the office, Mira immersed herself in tasks, emails and meetings, but her mind kept wandering back to the firelight from their wedding and the vows whispered under its warmth. Had they both already failed them? Or was this the moment they were meant to test their strength? Later that afternoon, she received a call that unsettled her. It was from Arav's mother. "Mira Beta, how are you adjusting?" the older woman asked warmly. Mira forced a smile, even though the woman couldn't see it. "I'm fine, Ma. Just busy with work." There was a pause, then her mother-in-law's voice lowered, almost conspiratorial. "You know, marriage takes time. Arav is like his father, reserved, not always expressive. Don't mistake his silence for indifference." The words sat heavy on Mira's chest. She wanted to believe them, but last night's bitterness was too fresh. Yet, part of her wondered if she was too harsh. Perhaps Arav's struggles were deeper than she knew. Meanwhile, Arav was having his own day of reckoning. He couldn't shake Mira's words. "You don't even know if you want this. Marriage to you." They played on a loop in his head, cutting deeper each time. He had never doubted his love for her, but he doubted himself. He doubted his ability to give her the life she deserved, one not weighed down by expectations or past shadows. His work offered no escape that day. Numbers blurred, colleagues' voices faded. He was adrift in his own storm. By evening, the unspoken wall between them seemed taller than ever. When Mira returned home, the air was thick with anticipation, both of them waiting for the other to break the silence. Finally, Arav spoke. "Mira, I know last night was harsh. I don't want us to become strangers in our own home." Her eyes softened, but she didn't let go of her guard. "Then don't shut me out, Arav. I can handle your fears, your doubts, but not your silence. I need honesty, even if it hurts." His shoulders slumped. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not of you, but of failing you, of repeating patterns I've seen all my life." For the first time, his vulnerability cracked the shell between them. Mira reached across the table, her hand finding his. "Then let me face that fear with you. Don't fight it alone." The moment was fragile but real, like a candle flickering against the wind. Their words didn't erase the wounds, but they acknowledged them. Before they could say more, Arav's phone buzzed. It was an email notification, one that made his face pale. He quickly locked the screen, but Mira caught the unease in his eyes. "What is it?" she asked. "Nothing urgent." he lied, forcing a smile. But deep inside, he knew it wasn't nothing. It was a shadow from his past, threatening to unravel everything they were trying to rebuild. Mira noticed the hesitation, but decided not to press, for now. Still, a seed of doubt was planted, and it would grow with time. That night, as they lay side by side in silence, the faint glow of the city outside their window, Arav's mind raced with the secret he hadn't shared. Mira, sensing his unrest, closed her eyes but remained awake, questions stirring within her. Between them, the distance was both shrinking and expanding. They had taken one step closer in honesty, yet something unseen was already waiting to test them again. And as dawn crept on the horizon, so did the truth, ready to echo louder than before. The evening air was thick with the scent of incense and marigold garlands as the wedding anniversary approached, though the celebration felt hollow to both Anaya and Raghav. The firelight flickered across the room, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for the corners where secrets had been buried. Raghav's unease had not abated. If anything, it had grown sharper, more insistent. The mysterious call from months ago, the fleeting suspicions, and the careful observations of Anaya's gestures now coalesced into a single, overwhelming question. What was she hiding? Anaya, meanwhile, sensed the tension tightening around her like a noose. She had anticipated resistance, fear of exposure, even hostility. But the intensity of Raghav's suspicion had begun to erode her own composure. She moved with quiet precision, preparing the room for the ceremony, her heart pounding against the cage of her ribs. Every glance from Raghav carried the weight of judgment she had not anticipated. Every smile from him felt calculated, testing her honesty. Raghav finally spoke, voice low but taut with barely restrained fury. Anaya, I need to know the truth. No more half answers, no more evasions. Her chest tightened. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, wondering if she could survive the confrontation with grace intact. Raghav, she began softly, I've tried to tell you in my own way, but it seems my words have never been enough. He took a step closer, the golden shawani glinting in the firelight, the heat of his presence almost unbearable. Then, tell me now. Don't hide behind ceremonies or smiles. I deserve to know everything before it's too late. Her hands shook slightly as she lifted her veil, revealing the face that had been her armor for so long. Her eyes met his, calm, yet charged with unspoken pain. I am transgender, she said, her voice steady despite the quiver that threatened to break free. I have lived my life with this truth, hidden for fear of rejection, fear of losing the people I care about. Raghav froze, the words hanging in the air like smoke from the ceremonial fire. The flicker of the flames reflected in his eyes, wide with shock, disbelief, and an emotion he refused to name. I don't understand, he murmured, voice trembling. Why didn't you tell me before? I wanted to, Anaya replied, taking a careful step toward him. I tried to, in my way, in my time. I hoped that our bond, our love, could transcend fear, but I could not risk humiliation or rejection. Not on a day that was supposed to celebrate unity and joy. Raghav's hands clenched at his sides, the intensity of emotion pressing down like a physical weight. Memories of family warnings, whispered, rumors, and old societal prejudices surged in his mind. His vision narrowed, and panic replaced reason. The sacred fire they had shared, once a symbol of their bond, now seemed to burn with judgment. The guests outside sensed nothing, their laughter and music a cruel contrast to the storm within the hall. Raghav's breath came fast, his mind teetering between anger, fear, and betrayal. He could not reconcile the man he thought he knew with the reality now standing before him. Raghav, please. Anaya's voice trembled, a plea that reached him through the chaos of his own thoughts. I'm still the same person who laughed with you, shared dreams with you, trusted you. Nothing about me has changed except what I could not reveal before. For a long, silent moment, the two stood frozen, the firelight dancing across their faces, illuminating the chasm between trust and doubt. Then, as if the world had tilted, Raghav's emotions surged uncontrollably. The fear, the shame, the anger, and the betrayal coalesced into a single irrational impulse. Before Anaya could react, he grabbed a ceremonial oil lamp from the nearby table. "You lied to me!" he shouted, voice cracking with fury. "And now you must pay!" The lamp slipped from his fingers, flames leaping toward the red silk of Anaya's sari. Panic erupted, the fire catching in an instant, consuming fabric and fear alike. Guests rushed in, shrieking, hands flailing to douse the growing blaze, but the damage had begun. Smoke curled upward, thick and suffocating, and the hall filled with chaos. Anaya screamed, the sound sharp and primal, cutting through the commotion. Her hand shot out instinctively toward Raghav, not in violence, but in desperate appeal for reason. The sacred fire that had once symbolized unity now mirrored destruction, reflecting the betrayal, misunderstanding, and unhealed fears that had been simmering in silence for far too long. And as water and cloth finally smothered the flames, the room was left in stunned silence. The revelation, once meant to bind hearts, had instead ignited a terrifying truth. Love alone could not shield them from prejudice, fear, and the consequences of hidden doubts. The wedding hall, once alive with laughter and music, now lay in ruin. Smoke still curled from the charred remnants of ceremonial decorations, the scent of burned silk and incense heavy in the air. Guests stood frozen in shock, some clutching scarves to their faces, others staring wide-eyed at the couple at the center of the chaos. Anaya sat on the floor, sari singed, hair matted with soot, eyes filled with tears but unbroken. Beside her, Raghav trembled, guilt and rage colliding in a storm he could neither name nor control. The initial panic had subsided into a suffocating, tense silence. Servants hurried to douse the last embers, water spilling over the marble floors, steam rising into the dim light. The sacred fire, meant to symbolize unity and devotion, had become a literal and metaphorical reflection of their fractured bond. Anaya's voice, though soft, cut through the heavy air. "Raghav, you have to understand," she said, gripping the edge of a charred pillar for support. "I never intended to deceive you. My truth, it was never meant to hurt you. It was meant to survive, even in fear." Raghav sank to his knees, his hands pressing into the cold floor. Words escaped him, but the trembling of his body conveyed the depth of his remorse. I don't know what I was thinking," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I let fear and doubt. I let anger take control." The guests, some of whom had been his family, now watched in disbelief, the joyous celebration replaced by a collective, uncomfortable awareness. A few stepped forward hesitantly, offering words of consolation, while others simply stood, processing the stark reality before them. A distant wail from the courtyard punctuated the tension, a reminder of the sacred duty that had been violated, not just to each other, but to the rituals meant to bind them. Anaya rose slowly, every movement deliberate, her gaze unwavering as she faced Raghav. "If we are to survive this, there can be no more lies, no more hiding, no more letting fear dictate our actions." Raghav looked up at her, the firelight, or what remained of it, reflecting in his eyes. He reached for her hand, hesitating, as though unsure if she would allow it. When her fingers closed around his, it was not a surrender but a fragile truce, a tentative acknowledgement that love, though tested, had not been entirely destroyed. Outside, emergency responders had begun, clearing the remnants of the disaster, but the true damage lay not in the charred silk or scorched wood. It was in the trust that had been shattered, and the psychological scars that would take far longer to heal. Anaya and Raghav sat together, the heat of their shared trauma slowly giving way to reflection, I should have spoken sooner, Raghav whispered, voice thick with regret. I let the world's judgments and my own insecurities control me. I forgot. I forgot why I loved you. Anaya's lips pressed into a thin line, not entirely forgiving, but willing to acknowledge the truth. And I should have found a way to trust you more openly, she said. We've both failed, but we're still here. The silence that followed was heavy, but different from before, less oppressive, tinged with cautious hope. Outside, the sounds of life continued. Footsteps, distant voices, the hum of the city that had once felt indifferent, but now seemed almost consoling. Raghav finally stood, extending his hand fully to Anaya. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then accepted it. Together, they navigated through the smoke and debris, each step a reminder of the fragility of trust and the resilience required to rebuild it. In the weeks that followed, the couple faced family scrutiny, societal gossip, and the personal aftermath of trauma. Counseling sessions, private conversations, and shared moments of honesty began to mend what had been broken. The fire had revealed not just fear and anger, but also the depth of their love, the bond that, though tested violently, had survived the flames. And while scars remained, both visible and invisible, Anaya and Raghav slowly learned that truth, no matter how painful, was stronger than suspicion, stronger than societal expectations. In the ashes of a night that could have destroyed them, they found a fragile but enduring clarity. That love could exist even amidst betrayal, that forgiveness could rise from the ruins, and that honesty, once fully embraced, could illuminate the darkest corners of the heart. The sacred fire, once a symbol of division, now lived in memory as a testament to resilience, a reminder that even in the wake of destruction, truth and trust could be reborn. Weeks had passed since the fire that had nearly destroyed both their marriage and their sense of safety. The wedding hall had been rebuilt, the ceremonial fire rekindled, yet the shadows of that night lingered in their home, in the corners of their minds where silence had once ruled. Anaya and Raghav had survived the immediate disaster, but survival did not erase fear, guilt, or mistrust. Raghav had changed in small ways that Mira noticed. He no longer avoided her gaze, yet there was a tension in the way he moved, a hesitancy that hadn't been there before. His hands trembled slightly whenever he spoke of the fire, of the accusations, or of the days leading up to the revelation. The weight of what he had almost done haunted him. The memory of the flames licking at Anaya's sari, the smell of smoke and fear, and the frantic cries of the guests who had tried to intervene. Anaya, too, had evolved, though differently. She carried herself with a quiet strength, but the trauma had left subtle marks, quickened heartbeats at sudden movements, a wariness whenever she sensed tension, a hesitancy to fully trust. Yet beneath the fragility, she exuded determination. She was no longer just surviving. She was learning to assert her truth with every word, every gesture, every glance. One rainy evening, they sat in the dimly lit living room, a single lamp flickering, against the shadows cast by the storm outside. The patter of rain on the window was a rhythm that neither could ignore, each drop a reminder of the impermanence of peace. Raghav broke the silence first. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, voice rough with emotion, "about what happened, and about everything I didn't understand before. I keep replaying it in my head, wondering how close I came to losing you completely." Anaya nodded, her eyes fixed on the lamp's weak glow. "We can't change the past," she said, "but we can decide what we do with what's left. And we have to be honest with each other if we want to move forward." Raghav swallowed hard. "I don't just mean with each other. I mean with myself. I've been living with so many inherited fears, judgments, societal pressures, the idea of what a real marriage should look like. I let those fears control me instead of listening to you, to us." Anaya reached for his hand. a steady, deliberate gesture that held weight. "And now?" she asked softly. "Now. I want to rebuild, but differently," he admitted. "Not as the man I thought I had to be, but as the man who can truly see and support you, no matter what." The room was quiet, except for the rain. Their shared silence was not uncomfortable this time. It was reflective, a pause in which both understood the fragility and the potential of what remained between them. Yet even in this fragile calm, the fire had left its mark. Guests still whispered, relatives still questioned, and the occasional stares of strangers reminded them that society had not forgotten the scandal. Each day required courage, not just in facing each other, but in facing the world that seemed unwilling to forgive deviations from tradition. Raghav finally spoke again, his voice firmer now. "I want to go back to the temple," he said, "together. Not for ceremonies, not for appearances, but for us, to prove we can honor love, truth, and commitment, despite what the world thinks." Anaya smiled faintly, a smile tinged with both hope and exhaustion. "Then we will," she said, "but we will also set boundaries. No one else will dictate how we define our marriage." The storm outside began to lessen, the rain softening into a gentle drizzle. Light seeped into the clouds, casting a muted glow across the room. For the first time in weeks, the shadows that had haunted them felt less like threats and more like reminders of what they had endured, of what they had survived, and of the fragility of trust that must now be tended with care. They sat together in silence, hands entwined, breathing in the lingering scent of rain and burned wood. The fire of the past night no longer raged within them, but its echoes, both cautionary and instructive, remained. They understood that love could coexist with fear, that honesty required courage, and that the future would demand constant vigilance, empathy, and commitment. And in that quiet, rainy evening, Anaya and Raghav made an unspoken promise that whatever shadows the world cast upon them, they would face them together, tempered by the lessons of fire, truth, and the enduring power of survival.